Greetings, friends of liberty. I must confess, although I haven't spoken of it recently, that in previous years I would, upon the invitation of a certain Doctor Who, oftentimes use his proffered time machine, the TARDIS, to conduct the most delightful excursions throughout history, both yet to come and the history which already has occurred, temporally, both prograde and retrograde. Now, one of the most interesting encounters that I ever had was emerging from the TARDIS with a poet by the name of William Wordsworth, merely 5 years in the future, in 1798. There we discussed his reflections on the French Revolution. Might I quote a brief portion of the poem he showed me, entitled Prelude, wherein he speaks of the beginnings of those glorious hopes for humanity, that the revolution might sweep away the inequitable taxation of the French state, the crimes and depredations of its fat clergy, the absolute monarchy with all its obsolescent privileges and abuses, and in their stead construct a more felicitous nation, a nation which might perhaps even have rivaled that of our own English state. God forbid. Wordsworth's words were, "Oh, pleasant exercise of hope and joy, for mighty were the auxiliars which then stood upon our side, we who were strong in love. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. O times in which the meagre stale forbidding ways of custom, law, and statute took at once the attraction of a country in romance, when reason seemed the most to assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress, to assist the work which then was going forward in her name." And Wordsworth was right. Indeed, on both sides of the channel, bliss was it indeed in that very dawn to be alive, when everyone harbored the hope that the French might reform their national abuses. But 'twas not to be. You now know instead what happened, the rise of the revolutionary bloodlust, murder and destruction untold in its brutality and degree, civil war, and in the end, the rise of a tyrant by the name of Bonaparte, who took the combined effort of all Europe to subdue. Our hopes dashed in the flames of a continent in war. Now, if we turn to the question of revolutions and new beginnings, in dawn's early light in your own 21st century in the United States of America, we review today a proposed blueprint for a brand new America, a map for a MAGA revolution, set forth by the president of the think tank, the Heritage Foundation, namely one Kevin Roberts. Roberts, the author of Dawn's Early Light, Turning Back Washington to Save America, of late has achieved no little notoriety for being the avowed and eternal friend of bigots like Tucker Carlson and Patrick Buchanan. In this book, he outlines his vision for an America remade in the image of his own Christian nationalism, and led by the likes of Donald J. Trump and his vice president, James David Vance, who wrote the foreword. Roberts begins in his first chapter claiming that a conspiracy of sorts against America exists, alleging that both the urban and suburban forest fires of America in 2020 actually were connected. They spring from a conspiracy against nature, against ordered civilized societies, against common sense and normal people, orchestrated by a network of political, corporate, and cultural elites who share a set of interests quite apart from those of ordinary Americans. They are known as the Uniparty. Roberts has thus introduced us to his villain number one, Washington and the elites who populate it. How to deal with them? He says, fight fire with fire. Conservatives can't merely continue putting out fires. We must be brave enough to go on the offense, strike the match, and start a long, controlled burn. Like deadwood in a forest, many of America's institutions have been completely hollowed out, fully captured by the uniparty. Which institutions need to be burned to the ground? Every Ivy League college, the FBI, the New York Times, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the Department of Education, 80% of Catholic higher education, BlackRock, the Loudoun County Public School System, the Boy Scouts of America, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum, the Chinese Communist Party, and the National Endowment for Democracy. Note that he calls both the World Economic Forum and the CCP American institutions. Having introduced the term uniparty to designate all those elite enemies and their institutions, whether political or otherwise, he then adds two additional rhetorical entities, the party of creation and the party of destruction. Who do you imagine the party of creation might be? His Christian nationalists, those who defend the God-given natural order that is capable of generating flourishing and new life if we learn to live within it. And the party of destruction? Those who seek to abolish the existing order in the name of emancipation, freedom, and progress. But aren't progress, freedom, and emancipation good things? Anyway, all atheists such as myself were apparently a part of the party of destruction, who in times past believed that religion didn't provide human beings with meaning, it entangled people in superstition. Exactly. So he commits himself here to being for religion, in other words, supernatural superstition, and also being for tradition. Think Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. How did America get into a state where the alleged party of destruction and the uniparty are so prominent, having a dominant position over the party of creation, where America is filled with a great degree of rottenness, of decadence, of torpor, of complacency, afflicting us? Clearly, it's because not enough of us are Christians. There are too many atheists, Buddhists, Confucians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and just plain religious slackers. How can you tell when someone spiritually has succumbed? By their fruits ye shall know them, he says. Even Ronald Reagan allegedly wasn't spiritual enough for Kevin because his Morning in America ad was about jobs, interest rates, home buyers, number of marriages, things that can readily be measured and that a bureaucracy can understand, not spiritual things. And so again, his solution for America is to burn away the rot and restore a shared vision of a glorious future. As you can see, there's lots of fire, smoke, and burning embedded throughout the entirety of Roberts' visions. Because burning and destruction are the answer, not the beliefs of the old wax museum conservatives, as he calls them, who thought and still think, like Rand Paul today, that if you just get government out of the way, the free market, civil society, individual liberty, the nuclear family, and more will take care of themselves. No, he says. Those Reagan Republicans and Democrats are obsolete. Now, in today's America, a conservative movement that limits itself to this stale program is co-signing the euthanasia of the American nation. So the answer is not small government, but big, powerful mega government. And the fact that small government and freedom allegedly don't work anymore is so clear that there is no point debating the matter anymore. Twilight, fire, and ruin are upon us. The time to burn America has arrived. Consequently, upon this theme, much of his next couple of chapters delivers multiple extended metaphors about fire or using fire. hearth fires in ancient Greece, control burns in forests so that the sequoia will release their seeds, the burning of parts of diseased Dutch elm trees as a way of containing the spread of the disease, and the American Revolution allegedly is a controlled burn in a forest with too much deadwood. Just as Coleridge in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner proclaimed, "Water, water everywhere, with not a drop to drink," so too Roberts seems to proclaim, "Fire, fire everywhere, from arson do not shrink." Let's turn now to the things in America he believes need the cleansing action of fire. Number one, woke ideology, of which he says it amounts to a new and alien principle of government intended to displace our constitutional order of liberty. Woke ideology is a parasite. It merely takes over existing institutions, sucks out their substance, and zombifies them. They are beyond saving. There is no fixing Harvard or reforming the FBI. Number two, he believes progress itself is a problem, quoting fellow Catholic John Sr., who said, "The strongest reactionary force impeding progress is the cult of progress itself, which, cutting us off from our roots, makes growth impossible and choice unnecessary." Not surprisingly, he hates the internet and its profound influence on our lives. Number three, one of his biggest bugaboos is the relatively low rate of fertility of American society, now at 1.66 per woman, down from 3.77 during the baby boom. He claims that this low rate of fertility is because the foundations of the American family have come under sustained assault, and that today many more women are not able to have the families they hope for. What are the solutions Roberts proposes to replace all the decadent institutions once he's burned them all down? Number one, family first fusionism. A, he claims that getting married and having kids gives you skin in the game for the future of your country. But contrary to Roberts, there are actually many reasons that a singleton or childless couple can want to have a productive country, the biggest being their own happiness and the happiness of those they love. Research in general does not indicate that people with children are happier, and places around the world do not show that those with the most children, like the Congo, Somalia, and Uganda, are very happy places. All of which doesn't mean that having children is bad, just that his implication that the childless are necessarily unpatriotic is fallacious. The best familial answer for America, he says, is to rebuild a culture of hope that celebrates children, encourages marriages, lifts up parents, cherishes extended family and community, and restores the civic fabric of our nation. The alternative is national suicide. Incidentally, he believes that the discovery of contraceptives meant society was remade according to a research agenda set by the party of destruction. Which institutions are responsible for the horror of contraceptives? Among others, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Pure evil. He also believes that much of modern technology, such as video games and Tinder, function as an indirect contraceptive in displacing human energy towards other activities than having and raising children. B, he proposes to incentivize more couples to have children by reducing admittedly unjust tax codes, which penalize families, and by attacking what he calls cost disease socialism. In other words, a rise in the price of big-ticket items such as healthcare, housing, and education. How does he propose to attack these increased prices, caused in many cases by government regulation and subsidy? Partly by decreased regulation, for example, in medicine by allowing more nurse practitioners to do more and reducing many other regulations. Ditto with education as well, he pointing out that between 2000 and 2021, the number of teachers in public schools increased by 9%, but the number of principals and assistant principals increased by 36%, and the number of school district administrative staff by 77%. The same dynamic is at play in higher education, which is true, which costs in many cases 3 to 4 times as much as it did in 1960 after adjusted for inflation. Other regulations too, as he points out, such as environmental regulations increasing the cost of building everything, also play a significant indirect role in raising the costs of having children. Housing in general is less affordable than it was 30 or 40 years ago for Gen Z and millennials, with only 55% owning a home at age 35, compared to 67% in 1980. But the basic problem with his argument here is that over the last 220 years, the fertility of American women has declined radically, from 50 per 1,000 children in 1800 to about 12 today. And for most of that time, the cost of raising children was nonetheless very low and constantly declining. Number 2, in terms of educational solutions. In a nutshell, he believes that while education has been highly damaged by woke ideology, the answer lies in promoting school choice. He notes approvingly on the rise of homeschooling that in 1973 there were fewer than 13,000 American kids being schooled at home. During the pandemic, on the other hand, more than 11 million kids were homeschooled. He justifies the creation of educational savings accounts and school choice, both homeschooling and regular, by highlighting the unproductive actions of the teachers' unions and the performance of the public schools during the pandemic, when it became obvious to parents what garbage was being taught to their sons and daughters. Transgender ideology, CRT, DEI, and the idea that we'll all burn up from runaway climate change in 8 years. Roberts believes in promoting classical education, which he defines as believing that students are precious beings made in the image of God. Roberts himself started a classical Christian academy, John Paul the Great Academy, in Lafayette, Louisiana. He was instrumental, in addition, in getting some colleges to use a classical version of the SAT called the Classical Learning Test. Number 3, turning to economic matters. His basic approach is found in the slogan, "The economy should serve the country," not the other way around. He blames A, the free market for sending American wealth and jobs to China, repressing wages, driving up the price of assets, bolstering woke corporations, and undermining small enterprises. And B, claims that the managerial revolution of the 1940s and beyond was a disaster, since power over everyday business decisions passed from entrepreneurs with skin in the game to managers and executives whose loyalties rested not in the corporations, but in the profession and process of management itself. He argues that this managerial revolution is a type of socialism that has infected most of American business, claiming in part that this is the reason why they've become so woke recently. If you think these companies and American business in general is still capitalist, are you ever wrong? Behind the seemingly capitalist facade of globalist corporatism lies simply socialism. So Tesla, Apple, Facebook, Nvidia, Intel, AMD, GE, and Walmart are all aspects of socialism. You just didn't realize it when you walked into Walmart last time to get some gummy bears, that it really represents a fusion of Marxist-Leninism and Mao's Little Red Book. As he literally says, the Great Reset is socialism wearing the modern corporation as a skin suit. And when these companies have completed their alleged Marxian reset, ownership of things will be a privilege afforded only to asset supermanagers such as BlackRock and large corporations such as Apple, whose uniparty loyalty can be depended on. The end of America is nigh. And what is his solution? More arson. Burning down companies such as Google and BlackRock by breaking them up will be good for America. Number 4, finally on foreign policy. Let's concentrate on his statements here about Ukraine. A, he complains that during wartime, President Zelensky found time to address a petition to legalize gay marriage in Ukraine. But of course President Zelensky would do that. Number one, it's the right thing to do, and number two, Biden was woke. So doing that possibly might have gotten Biden to give Ukraine more weapons and allow a greater use of them. Are you a homophobic Catholic, Roberts, like so many other Christian nationalists have been? B, he worries that since February 2022, the United States has allocated $182.8 billion in emergency funding to support Ukraine and the region. Yes, and I can't think of money better spent. C, he says, in 1994, when we signed the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances, we promised to offer Ukraine assistance should its freedom be threatened after it gave up its holdover Soviet nuclear warheads. True. And we can see what those assurances mean now under Trump 2.0. D, he says, at the Heritage Foundation, we quickly became alarmed that the Biden administration did not seem to have anything approaching an endgame for the war and thus had no real strategy other than ever deeper involvement. Strategy? It's easy. Support Ukraine until it wins. And also, which Biden didn't do, allow Ukraine to strike targets inside Russia like they're doing right now so successfully. Biden should have done that from the very beginning. But that, Roberts doesn't point out. Finally, E, he says, we must begin earnest negotiations with the Russians to try to find a peaceful settlement for the wider region. That's the same moronic conclusion Trump has drawn and that Neville Chamberlain drew when negotiating with Hitler. But we know very well now how well appeasement works with genocidal dictators. This is the alleged spirituality of this Christian nationalism at work. Appeasement to evil. Finally, F, he says, it's insane that we let a Ukrainian, Alexander Vindman, in 2019, run the National Security Council's Ukraine desk and attempt to overthrow the duly elected president of the United States because he didn't like his Ukraine policy. First, Vindman was an American, a lieutenant colonel. Secondly, Vindman acted appropriately in blowing the whistle on Trump 1.0 because he tried to get Ukraine's President Zelensky to investigate Trump's rival Joe Biden by the strong-arm tactic of withholding funding that had already been allotted by Congress. That's an abuse of power, one of the dozens committed by Roberts' lawless president. And Biden and Hunter were later cleared of any wrongdoing by a Republican Senate investigation. Let's turn now to evaluating this book's strengths and weaknesses. I regard this book as I do President Trump's second term in office. On the one hand, Trump has undoubtedly at times acted in beneficial ways, both for the United States and the West, in A, making Europe contribute more to its own military defense, B, in bombing Iran, C, to a degree in helping Israel, D, in attacking woke laws and rules in government, and E, in further deregulating the American oil and gas industry, and maybe nuclear. That's all beneficial. But otherwise, Trump is a growing and increasing disaster, a lawless, rogue president with pure contempt for the Constitution and the principles of the Founding Fathers. And even more disastrous are his numerous acts of treason in selling out Ukraine for the mess of pottage that he and his cronies might receive from Putin with business deals in Russia, and just 3 days ago, selling China itself, America's deadliest adversary, one of the highest of high-end NVIDIA chips, the H200. Pure treason. Never mind January 6th and his attempt to suborn Mike Pence into committing treason himself. Similarly, Roberts has some good suggestions in this book, but for the most part, like Trump, he's a disaster. The good. He's for the Second Amendment, no gun control. As I said, he's for school choice, which would be an improvement over the present system, but he's not for complete privatization. He's for repealing the anti-discrimination statutes of the Civil Rights Act, which is good, and which Trump apparently has done in the public sector, at least to a degree. D, he's against the Jones Act, which is crippling American shipping and shipbuilding. Repealing it would be very beneficial. E, he says, what is strangling our country in terms of regulation is all of the gossamer threads that impose a vetocracy emanating from Washington. That's true. There's a huge amount of regulation that damages America. But rolling back all this regulation is precisely what the old-style conservatives advocated, whom he rejects and mocks as wax museum conservatives. And yet he himself does this throughout the whole book dozens of times, advocating the vast reduction of governmental regulation. And finally, F, he's for abolishing the Fed, although he doesn't mention it here. Now the bad. Number one, the greatest single problem is that this book, like his Project 2025, is a blueprint for Christian nationalism. What is nationalism? The belief that you can further the interests of your nation by violating property rights, either of the people within or without your national borders. And Christian nationalism is the belief that Christians should be privileged by and be able to use the violence of the state against others. Think of the Crusades that slaughtered Indians, pagans, or Muslims by the hundreds of thousands. Roberts expresses this love of violence both indirectly and directly. His rhetoric is both implied and explicit. As I showed in the beginning, the first couple of chapters are filled with the violent images of flames and burning. He wants to evoke the mood of legitimized destruction. And, as in the beginning, so too at the end, he makes the following statement. If an American institution is incompatible with or contemptuous of public prayer, I would be hard-pressed to believe that it should not be simply burned down for the common good. But all scientific and many artistic institutions correctly do not invoke public prayer. Science labs, museums, symphony halls, art galleries, just to name a few. Should all these be burned to the ground if they refuse to kowtow to his Christian nationalist demands? Similarly, he says that reforming America will involve breaking some eggs. Of course, it was the infamous Walter Duranty of the New York Times, that apologist for Soviet mass murder, who said in 1933, you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. It's not surprising, seeing Roberts' president's admiration of the fascist mass murderer and dictator Vladimir Putin, that Roberts too would invoke the alleged necessity of breaking eggs. Aside from all the rhetorical invocations to fiery destruction and the breaking of eggs, let's review the literally violent, rights-violating policies he advocates, one by one. A, he's for public education, saying, one of the things I love about the United States is that it guarantees the finest education in the history of the world to everyone, regardless of birth, family situation, or parental involvement. First, does he have any clue how internationally incompetent American public K-12 education is? Finest? Is he kidding? And of course, it's so bad precisely because it's not actually free politically or economically, but uses the violent taxing power of the state to steal from everyone to subsidize an inferior collectivist school system. The very school system controlled by teachers' unions, which indoctrinate students with woke, trans, and other ideologies, which he hates and complains so much about. So his solution for K-12 education is, as mentioned, school choice, which, leaving public schools in place, still would likely be better, but not as good as simply abolishing all public education altogether. Dollar for dollar, throughout all of recorded human history, public has proven inferior to private education. But he's for it. B, He claims that a fake economy creates weak people and weak families. But the reality is that, like JD, he never identifies the single greatest cause damaging American families, the welfare state, as, for example, that wax museum conservative Charles Murray showed at length in his book Losing Ground. So all his rhetoric about family-first fusionism is utterly compromised by his ignorance here. And that's because he wants to use coercion to steal from all Americans and again give the proceeds to his and JD's constituents in flyover country. He doesn't want to eliminate welfare for them. C, he wants to use violence to prevent immigrants from coming to America, claiming that the elites of America don't have Sino-Mexican fentanyl addicts on their block, menacing young asylum seekers, leering at their daughters, or occupying their kids' schools, or illegal immigrants undercutting their wages or flooding their doctors' offices. But instead, the reality is very different than he portrays. Number one, Mexican immigrants have significantly lower rates of fentanyl addiction than Native Americans, whether white or black. Number two, both legal and illegal immigrants have lower rates of crime, sexual and otherwise, than Native Americans. Three, privatizing schools will solve the problem of immigrants using the public school system, but he's against privatization. And four, privatizing healthcare would do the same when immigrants abuse and free ride on the healthcare system. Freedom and smaller government is the answer. But again, he doesn't believe in that American tradition. D, being against free trade and for economic violence, Roberts is naturally for tariffs, saying that President Trump's imposition of unilateral tariffs was a great first step that we should extend with incentives for U.S. companies to reshore, nearshore, and friendshore supply chains. But the reality again shows Roberts' profound ignorance. American manufacturing has been damaged significantly by Trump's tariffs, with 42,000 manufacturing jobs lost between Liberation Day and August 2025 alone. The increased tariffs mean that the prices for many metals, such as aluminum, steel, and copper, have increased and made American manufacturing more uncompetitive. This has resulted in decreased production, exports, and lost profits, and the migration of production to other countries. Given his stone-aged economic beliefs, it's not surprising that he says, paraphrasing nationalist and protectionist Alexander Hamilton, that we need to pursue an active commerce for the 21st century. E, again, in rights violations, he's for mandatory national service programs. He says they would begin every summer with cohorts of high school graduates streaming to a 4 or 6 week training program hosted in our most beautiful national parks all over the country and run by our military. Something like national service is a part of what will it take to knit the American people together again on a spiritual level. No thanks. Keep your creepy, religious, collectivist, nationalist hands off of America's young people. Hitler loved the Hitler Youth Program, the better to indoctrinate young people with. That's what Roberts wants for America. F. Note that he avoids mentioning the phrases property rights or natural rights throughout the entire book. So much for those American traditions. G. Of course, he's for the violence and senselessness of Trump's drug war, even wanting to prevent the legalization of marijuana. He blames American addiction deaths on China, saying China's playbook paved the way for dominance by spiritual warfare. China has pursued the same two-pronged strategy of cultivating addiction both among the people and among the elites. But the reality instead is that it is Trump's and America's drug war that has enormously damaged America and other countries, partly by increasing the violence of drug gangs and cartels. In America, the homicide rate likely could be cut in half as it was when Prohibition ended in 1933 if Trump stopped his drug war. Similarly, in Mexico, tens of thousands of homicides annually could be prevented. On the demand side, hundreds of thousands of Americans have died unnecessarily because they don't know the strength and purity of the drugs they're taking. Here, Roberts is just avoiding accepting responsibility for the enormous harm and deaths caused by his president's drug war. H. He wants Congress to pass legislation prohibiting automatic filtering by educational level in hiring, at least for positions in which a professional degree isn't required by law, such as nurses, medical doctors, and structural engineers. Again, none of his damn business. I. Being a Christian nationalist, he wants to outlaw pornography. So far, Trumples hasn't tried to implement that aspect of Project 2025, because he knows full well how the courts would view such attempts on the virtue of the First Amendment. J. Of course, as a Christian nationalist, Roberts wants to violate the rights of women to have an abortion, although he doesn't mention that here. And finally, K, not unsurprisingly, he wants to pass legislation forcing employers to pay people more to work on the Sabbath. Number 2. Because Roberts is so clueless about the importance of freedom in having made America great, and in making America great again, he completely misunderstands American history and how America became a superpower. As I've described in numerous videos here, for example, is Carl Benjamin's Sargon right in saying England should be an ethno-state? And also in the video, is mass immigration Britain's greatest problem? It's easy for most countries to supercharge their economies. How do you do that? You need to do 2 things. A, have a free country consistently, and B, open your doors to all immigrants who don't have a criminal record or infectious diseases. Both at the same time. Both together work because if you have a free country with no welfare state, no gun control, no drug war, preferably no public education, and no labor market and housing regulations, like America previously, then you can add tens of millions of immigrants and supercharge your economy. No welfare state means that you'll attract the best hardworking immigrants. No drug war means no rise of drug gangs and cartels. No housing restrictions means a booming real estate market to house all those immigrants. No labor market restrictions means the quick and effective employment of all that incoming labor. And no gun control means low crime rates. Roberts claims he's an historian, but he has no clue how to interpret America's proven track record in using freedom and immigrants to become great. What I just said now completely invalidates this whole book and his Project 2025. Number 3. Aside from the state violence he believes in and incorporates into his many Project 2025 recommendations, the book is filled with highly ironical statements. Ironical because the disparate hodgepodge of Christian, nationalist, and conspiratorial theories that fill his Cajun head make for a hugely contradictory jumble bumble. So, for example, he says, A. What every faction of the Party of Destruction shares is the belief that all human values are ultimately arbitrary. There's nothing more arbitrary than his Catholic God and religion, or any God or religion, purely imaginary, subjective, and arbitrary, unrelated to anything in reality. B. He says the most important act of faithfulness is also the hardest. It's telling the truth. Religious faith is about pretending that something for which no evidence exists. That Allah or Jehovah or Shiva are real. So religious faith is about deceiving oneself, the opposite of telling the truth. C. He says the foundation of U.S. trade policy must be the voice of common sense and historical experience supported by the American people. But that's the opposite of what his president is in his economic idiocy is doing today, levying a huge import tax on the American people who hate his needless and destructive tariff and theft of their property, which is, incidentally, unjustified by any historical experience. D. He says, all over the country there are signs that our ordered liberty is giving way to anarcho-tyranny. No, criminal violence in America in general is very low historically, although again, it could be made even lower by getting rid of his president's drug war. That, again, might cut the homicide rate in half. E. He claims, right now we have a perverted immigration system that paradoxically rewards individuals, many of whom come to America illegally, who are most likely to end up on government assistance. Generally false. The majority of immigrants use fewer governmental benefits than Native Americans. But in any case, whatever they use, the best policy would be to get rid of the welfare state in its entirety, which would help both Native Americans and immigrants. But again, he's against that. F. He says he sees in MAGA and the new conservative movement lions awakening. I personally don't see lions. I see the rapey retard and Christian nationalist Pete Hegseth, the blind loyalist, lips puffed with filler Ice Barbie Kristi Noem, the mendacious Pam Bondi, the Christian deceiver of a nation Trump's PR flack Caroline Leavitt, the traitorous head of the DNI Tulsi Gabbard, that hater of the American Constitution and its framers, Stephen Miller, Trump's traitorous envoy to Russia, the witless Steve Witkoff, and of course, the bearded gerbil J.D. Vance. No lions here. G, he praises Barry Weiss, saying that she's an acclaimed journalist who left a uniparty sinecure at the New York Times to found the website The Free Press. But, ironically and quite fittingly, she's criticized him for his coddling of extremists, for the many resignations at Heritage because of his friendship with bigots, and for his inability to clearly and effectively fight anti-Semitism and its champions. It doesn't appear to bother Roberts by his public pronouncements that, according to one report, 30 to 40% of young interns on Capitol Hill and in Trump's administration are sympathetic to Nazis. And it's not at all surprising that the Christian nationalists in Germany, who started World War I and partly World War II, with Hitler having significant support from Protestant Christians, were so anti-Semitic. Indeed, as Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, there is nothing new under the sun. But I would point out to President Roberts that hardly any atheists, German or otherwise, supported Hitler. H. He says, unless we recover the Republican tradition of confronting globalist corporatism exemplified by the Boston Tea Party and Teddy Roosevelt, our way of life will be lost. He conveniently forgets that the Boston Tea Party was against an unjust tariff tax, just like Trump's tariffs, and that Teddy Roosevelt was a progressive. I. He lauds the moral quality and obligation of duty, praising Princeton's unofficial motto, in the nation's service. But the irony is that while collectivists like Roberts love duty, the worst collectivists in history, like Hitler, they love duty the most. So, for example, Hitler loved pointing out to Germans their alleged duty to fight for the fatherland and to be racially pure. J. It's ironical that he's against the CCP in communist China, but he's oblivious to the fact that collectivist societies like Red China today are very nationalistic, just as he is. Are we supposed to become more like China? To beat China, Mr. Roberts? K. He notes in the vein of demagogic populism that he expresses throughout the book that Our current elites see themselves not as leaders of a republic, but as members of a global community. Well, yes, they see themselves as part of universal humanity, as part of civilization. Not a bad idea. It's not surprising that his president hates the rule of law and a normal, polite way of treating others, represented by civilizational norms. The insults, the slurs, the acts of intimidation and violence, these are the methods of his Christian nationalist president. L. He claims to be against America's imperial overreach, while at the same time his own president threatens Canada, Greenland, and Panama with the Dunn Road Doctrine. M. He says the first thing a beefed-up Congress should do in preventing Chinese influence, after banning TikTok, is bring back the House Un-American Activities Committee. Sure, let's all go back to the McCarthy era. N. He quotes John Quincy Adams, who said, "America's glory is not dominion, but liberty. Her march is the march of the mind. She has a spear and a shield, but the motto upon her shield is freedom, independence, peace." Yes. And note how Adams didn't mention Christianity or the state violence of Roberts' nationalism. Oh, as a recovering neocon, he says, in a Charles Dickens novel, you'd know what to think about a foreign policy agenda put forward by the characters with the names such as Max Boot, Paul Wolfowitz, Samantha Power, and Anne-Marie Slaughter. That's actually partly funny. But it's ironical because it's just about the only joke found in this whole book. Ideologues like himself are notorious for not having any sense of humor. P. He says that the CCP's overall strategy is pitting America against America. That's exactly his strategy in this whole book, pitting blue states against red states, Democrats against Republicans, elites against the common man, and corporate America against everyone else. Roberts is the ultimate practitioner of polarization and identity politics. Q. He says that the CCP wants you shutting up about Uyghur genocide. And this, when his own president has shut up about the tens of thousands of Russian war crimes and welcomed a Russian genocidal dictator laying down the red carpet for him in Anchorage, Alaska. R. It's ironical that throughout the whole book, he complains about the existence and origins of woke without realizing its two causes. A, the anti-discrimination statutes of the Civil Rights Acts imposed on all American institutions, as Richard Hananias described so well, and B, the greatly increased governmental funding and control of American higher education since World War II. Higher education has since become a breeding ground for woke and many other ideologies. So again, he's oblivious to a lack of freedom creating these social problems. Governmentally mandated anti-discrimination statutes, and B, governmental education, the actual causes of woke. He knows so little about the way that American society works, he thinks woke ideology just popped up out of the heads of corporate managers reinforced by the CCP. S. He claims that the switch of manufacturing jobs from America and other countries to Asia and China resulted in killing millions of deplorables in certain counties in Iowa, North Carolina, Oregon, and other states. But the truth is the exact opposite. Walmart alone, in shuttling Chinese goods to America, by one report, saved Americans $287 billion in 2006. If we take the average of $200 billion per year saved from the year 2000 to 2020, Chinese manufactured goods sold in Walmart alone saved Americans $4 trillion. Savings are not killings. The reality is that manufacturing always goes and should go to the low-cost producer, just like manufacturing in America migrated after World War I from the Northeast to the South. That migration, too, helped millions. It didn't kill them. Kevin. The actual real shock, whether Chinese or other, is being created by Trump's trade wars, which are damaging and bankrupting thousands of American farmers and businesses and hurting consumers by raising prices. T. He says the deep state, as a tendency, a network, and an ideology, is the enemy of the American spirit. That's true, but Trumples is creating his own deep state. Are you against that, Kevin, or for it? U. He claims that one of the most absurd authorities claimed by the federal government is the right to regulate every mouthful of food produced by a business in the entire country. But he sees no contradiction in wanting to ban every ounce of marijuana that people smoke or eat. V. He claims there's a myth that the frontier closed with the end of U.S. territorial expansion. But anybody who spent time in the Big Sky country of Montana, in the vastness of the Great Plains, or in the West Texas valleys knows that this isn't really true. The frontier is alive and well. No, the frontier is any area of human society where we've reached the edge of our knowledge and control. So space is a frontier. The structure of the atom and elementary particles, how cancer operates, and even why women feel the need to wear makeup. These are the actual frontiers of society and science, not Montana, its beautiful farm, range, and backcountry. W. He claims it's no coincidence that Steve Jobs, living on an LSD-soaked orchard commune, chose an apple with a bite out of it as his computer's symbol. And ye shall know God's knowing good and evil. Here, this backward Christian nationalist is trying to cast shade on one of America's greatest entrepreneurs. But the apple was the perfect symbol for Apple products, which have brought enormous degrees of productive knowledge to everyone, unlike the violence and superstition of Roberts's Catholicism. So it's no accident that Apple is one of the most beloved of American companies. In conclusion, this book deserves a D+. It's a blueprint for American decline. Roberts, as president of the Heritage Foundation, shows how much intellectual rot has infected that previously esteemed think tank, just as it has so many liberal institutions. He himself has filled his head with unpatriotic MAGA garbage, both religious and secular. His irrational and intolerant Catholicism, his lawless nationalism, and the litter and intellectual debris of numerous conspiracy theories. They're all in there. And his president, Donald J. Trump, every day and in every way, in following Roberts' playbook, is showing how pathetic, unproductive, violent, and bigoted Christian nationalism can be. If very consistently implemented over multiple presidential terms, Christian nationalism is guaranteed to turn America into an isolationist, crony capitalist, poor banana republic and police state, a shell of its former self and what it might have become. Happy for my part that we Englishmen of the late 18th century understand liberty, the protection of property rights, and the values of patriotism and the Enlightenment in a way that Roberts never has nor will. I bid you well and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.